Here are 5 things that you should never do on the interview. Number 1 is to talk poorly about your previous employer or boss. A common question you get asked in the interview is, so what did you dislike about your boss or your company? And people say, yeah, you know what, my boss, he was really mean to us, he pushed us around, he was a bit of an asshole. Or they might say, you know what, the company that I work for, they really run things really sketchy. They didn't do the maintenance on time. They were punishing pilots for no reason. Don't say any of that. If you do that, it's 100% going to cost you the interview. You're not going to pass. The reason being is because the interviewer wants to see that if they were to hire you and you move on to another company, are you going to talk poorly about them too? And if you talk poorly about your previous employer, there's a very, very high likelihood you're going to do the same to the new employer. So never ever talk poorly about your previous employer. The second thing to avoid doing is what I call digging yourself into a hole. And what I mean by that is every time you keep saying more and more words, you end up making it more and more negative and digging yourself deeper and deeper into the ground, and you might not be able to recover from that. An example would be if they were to ask you a question about why are you leaving your previous job? You know, don't say, well, I'm working evenings and weekends and holidays and I don't really want to do that anymore. Well, guess what? In your new job as a pilot is a very, very, very likelihood, especially as a junior pilot, you're going to be doing the same thing. So if you say something that you don't like, make sure it's not something that's going to be translated to your new job. If you say you don't want to be commuting, but your new job, you don't find out the base until maybe the ground school date, so there's very high likelihood that you're going to be commuting for some time, you don't want to say that. If they were to ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You don't want to say, well, I see myself at Air Canada or WestJet. If you're applying to a small regional company, you don't want to say that. You want to make it look like you want to be at this company for the next few years at least. So don't mention any other company into the future. I wouldn't also mention any other positions that much into the future. Don't say, well, I just can't wait to be, you know, a training captain or a chief pilot. That's not really what they're hiring you for. The third thing you want to avoid doing is to put people in their gender roles during the interview. For example, I see a lot of people say he or him when referring to a captain and she when referring to the flight attendants. And sometimes the interviewer is a female captain. So instead, I would keep it to neutral terms. When referring to the captain, I would just say, well, this is what the captain said. This is what the captain did. Referring to the flight attendant, saying, yeah, this is what the flight attendant said. This is what the flight attendant did. So just keep it neutral. That way you don't have a chance of offending anybody, especially in this day and age when the roles are kind of mixed around. There's a lot of female pilots you're going to be flying with. All right, the next tip, and this is going to be quite obvious, is actually dressing up professionally. You might think that this is so obvious. Obviously, I'm going to dress up professionally, but let me actually tell you what professionally dressed is. I've seen this personally in real life many times when I have gone for the interview. My colleagues who have interviewed as well, they showed up, believe it or not, in jeans and t-shirt. Yes, jeans and t-shirt for an airline interview. And guess what? I never saw them again. They never got hired. So just make sure when you're going for the interview, you always dress up a notch above. It's always good to go really formal with the suit, the blazer, the tie, get your hair groomed nicely. I personally wouldn't use cologne at all. I like cologne to use in my daily life, but when I go for the interview, I don't wear cologne because the other person sitting across from me might be sensitive to smell. So I don't wear any cologne, and I don't wear too much flashy things like, you know, like a flashy watch and like multiple chains. So just keep the jewelry, etc. very basic. Don't wear cologne, but dress very professionally and have a professional haircut. And the final tip I have for you to not do for the interview is to show up late. Now, especially with an online video interview that's happening a lot these days, showing up late could actually mean not testing your technology in advance. I've had it where one of my clients didn't test the technology, and when they showed up for the interview time, 5 minutes before logging in, when they looked at the instructions, they were like, wait a minute, I actually have to download an app. So they go rushing to download the app. They have to create an account, and then they start the interview, and then guess what? The microphone audio wasn't working for some reason, and the interview started, and the interviewer and my client sat there for about 10 minutes awkwardly looking at each other, and there was no audio, and they ended the interview, and they never called that person back again. Ouch. Log in well in advance with a friend or family member, test the audio, test the video, get the lighting all set up nicely, and if you're in person, you know, I think you must show up at least 30 minutes in advance. If you show up 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the interview, to me, that's still cutting it close. You're still going to be rushed. Show up at least 30 minutes early, go and use the washroom, get relaxed, get calm, and then go for the interview nice and relaxed. So there you have it. Those are my top tips for what not to do during the interview. Avoid doing these things, and everything else becomes that much easier. Hope these tips find you well, and I'll see you next time.